Great students, teachers, and resources do.
Students are not afraid of rigorous courses, but we need the resources to allow us to complete that. Also to compete, not just among other Maryland students, but the world.
But some have questioned what meaningful impact the community has had.
They hold these big meetings at Poly, and it was in the auditorium, and it was packed. And there was no way to, like you said, to be able to effectively communicate or feel like your voice is being heard. But at the end of the day, they can say, oh, well, we reached out to the community members. We were there. We were inside the schools to see what parents felt, see what community members thought of the Kirwan Commission. But have they really?
Many of the subsequent meetings of work groups and the commission have been occurring during the workday, and only in Annapolis, making them inaccessible to working families. In an email, Commission Chair Brent Kirwan said our work group meetings have been open to the public and have been well attended. Concerned citizens and groups have been invited to and have provided valuable input at these sessions. This input has in many cases shaped our policy documents. We have posted draft policy statements and invited the public to provide comments. Commissioner Kirwan also noted the meetings, not including the work groups, are live streamed and stored online. However, the Commission is yet to finish one of its most important tasks, determining how much it will cost to create a world-class education system.
Folks are going to have to be behind this and pushing it to the Maryland General Assembly. This is going to have a huge price tag, and it's going to shock a lot of people when they see how much these things are going to cost. But the reality is it's going to make such a difference when it comes to our individual kids, our students, and really changing the paradigm of where we are in Maryland.
Maryland is one of the wealthiest states in the country. But in the 1990s, courts found that the state of Maryland was shortchanging poor school districts like Baltimore, violating students' rights to an adequate education as mandated in the state's constitution. In 2001, the Thornton Commission, Kirwan's predecessor, created a funding formula that addressed these disparities. But increases to Thornton were frozen due to budget shortfalls after the 2007 economic collapse. The Jacobs Report, a state commission study, found the state needs to spend an additional $2.9 billion a year on Maryland schools. Kirwan's proposal on funding is certain to be one of its most contentious. The Early Childhood Education Work Group presented recommendations to the full commission to expand access to preschool to all 3- and 4-year-olds, with priority given to low-income and special education students. Also, to increase access to privately run Judy Centers, which provide childcare to families who can't afford it from birth to age 5. But some have been critical of the recommendations. The Baltimore City Public School System, as well as the Maryland State Education Association, the state's biggest union, wrote letters to Kirwan requesting several modifications. In an email, Brent Kirwan responded that the commission will be able to address satisfactorily, at least from our perspective, many of the concerns they have. Some of the concerns included Kirwan to reconsider requiring 50% of pre-K seats be reserved for private or community-based providers, instead keeping them within the public schools. Kirwan acknowledged the need to change that language. Meanwhile, the Maryland American Civil Liberties Union urged Kirwan to more rapidly implement pre-K for low-income 3-year-olds. Another work group, examining more resources for at-risk students, has recommended increasing resources for at-risk students and students with disabilities, including wraparound services and more fully funded community schools. Advocates would like to see clear guidelines for developing and sustaining strong community schools with quality staffing to support them. However, the Commission has yet to place a price tag on how much more high-needs students deserve. Commissioners found that as a state, Maryland spends 4.9% less money on poor districts like Baltimore than wealthy ones. A third working group is focused on developing an ample supply of high-quality and diverse teachers and school leaders. This work group is recommending increasing teacher pay by 10% over 3 years and other incentives to help retain quality teachers, including a career ladder that supports advancement as well as a more rigorous teacher preparation and certification process. We asked Commissioner Rice to respond to critics who say increased standards will create more barriers to entry, especially for teachers of color.
The reality is that by increasing more stringent educational requirements, that certainly will possibly create some barriers. The reality is that we'll see benefits as well. Plus the addition of the salary increases, 10%, we have a lot of some of our finest students who who have struggled all of their lives to try and escape poverty, and then to ask them to take a lower tier job after the sacrifices that they've made, not only personally, but invested so much when it comes to education and educating themselves and lifting themselves up.
But the MSEA says this won't be enough to keep pace with similar states like New Jersey and Massachusetts. They also urged Kirwan to require school aides, who comprise about a third of educators but are not covered under the pay requirements, receive a living wage. The Commission's early recommendations did acknowledge the need for a more diverse teaching workforce. Just 25% of teachers are people of color, compared to nearly 2/3 of the student body. Beyond pay raises that impact all educators, advocates are seeking a range of changes to training, recruitment, and ongoing support, both in what is required from the higher education space and alternative certification programs, along with how those efforts are funded to accomplish this. With an eye on preparing students for the future of work, the College and Career Readiness Pathways Group is recommending schools and curriculums focus on getting all students to be college and career ready by 10th grade. Tutoring, mentoring, and other resources will be provided to those who fall behind starting in kindergarten. School systems will be required to provide college preparatory or similar classes, as well as partnering with two-year colleges to offer programs that can lead to an associate's degree. Governance and accountability. The Commission has yet to determine how state will increase accountability for high-quality schools and strengthen governance, including in the implementation of the Commission's proposals. Further, there seems to be no direct accountability measures for districts to be responsive to their communities. And while Kirwan's scope is large, it does not include facilities, which are being addressed by a separate 21st Century School Facilities Commission, also known as the NOC Commission. In 2019, the Maryland legislature is scheduled to make decisions about the Commission's recommendations, determining whether they will be implemented and how they will be funded.
All right, so that was a lot. Lots has been done, but there's more to be done, and that's what we're discussing tonight. I want to remind everyone to share their comments in the comment section when you're watching live, either on Facebook Live or on YouTube at our website, and also via Twitter using the hashtag TRNNEducation. Welcome to all of you in the room. How are we feeling? Good. You look good. I said earlier, you look like the United Colors of Benetton. So this is going to be a unifying conversation about what we want for our schools, right? So why don't we start here? Will you kind of raise your hands if you have been involved in some way in advocacy or efforts to get information out about the Kirwan Commission to the community? Yeah? Good. So we have folk who have been engaged and been involved. I want to give a shout out to the Intersection, a youth-led advocacy group working with young people to make sure there's student voice in all that we do, so welcome. What I want to know from you all is what comes to mind when you envision what excellent schools look like. Let's ground the conversation in what we want, and then we can talk more about what we just saw in terms of where the Kirwan Commission is and where we can move forward. Is that okay? So who wants to start? What should schools look like for all students? Raise your hand, and we have people who will come to you with the microphone. Yes, sir. Okay.
I believe that schools should be more like community-based and young students supporting each other. Either ones that are having more problems with solving math or English, they should be working together more as community-based, whether boys and girls in the same classroom, to make sure everybody's doing more successful and not, comparing each other to who's doing the best, but working together as a team to, reach that goal, whatever that is in that future.
Great, thank you. Yes. And will you say your name when you start? And sure. Possibly how you're affiliated with Baltimore City Schools, even if it's just being a community member.
Okay. My name is Monica. I currently live in Baltimore City, and I don't have a son in school anymore. We were part of the Baltimore County community, but I feel that this particular subject touches all of us because what's happening in Baltimore City is also happening in Baltimore County, quiet as that's kept. But to your question, what I would like to see, or what I think that students need for proper education, is a clean facility with working parts, healthy water, and updated technologies so that these students are able to compete with other counties within the state as well as other states and around the world.
Great, thank you. So I don't want to put any of my young people on the spot. You're not paying attention, so I'm going to go right to you. Isn't that what they do in the classrooms? So I'm going to come out to you. Tell me what you want for your schools. What should they all look like? Will you stand up for me?
You want me to introduce myself? Yeah. Okay. My name is Nina Davis. I'm part of the intersection. And for me, what I want my schools to look like is I want a diverse population and something that we can all work together rather than finding and separating ourselves, because I find that, you know, when we get into high school and we get into different schools, period, that we find ways to find our own, like, cliques and groups, and instead I want a collaborative environment that, you know, we can work on different group projects together and, like, actually have textbooks to work with, and as the lady said previously, just updated technology to actually, you know, do current things and, you know, I guess just be one with what's actually going on in the world.
Thank you. Okay, so what are schools supposed to be for? What are they supposed to be doing? Hold on. You're not going to be all loud and then when I walk away, whisper, stand up for me and tell me your name.
My name is Charles. I'm also a part of the intersection, and I attend Baltimore City Public Schools. I have been most of my life. And schools are supposed to educate. That's their job, to educate and propel our youth.
How are they supposed to do that? What should they look like?
I agree with what the lady said before about how they should be well supplied. Our students need technology up to date so that they can stay on topic and be able to push with the rest of the world. And I feel like they should be well supported because some of our students have stuff going on at home or stuff going on in their life, and it can be up to 200 to 250 students to one counselor, or to even like 500 to one counselor, and our students deserve better. They need to be well supported, and they need to have somebody to come to talk to if they have troubles at home or need help with homework or tutors or counseling or whatever it need be.
Thank you. So have a seat. What about the rest of you? How do you respond to what we heard from some of our students and some of our other community members? Yes. Hold on, we're going to get a mic to you.
It has really just touched my heart as to what this young gentleman just said and the young lady beside him, that I really didn't understand how the wraparound services are so needed in our communities. You know, we all have our own personal problems or our family issues, but not realizing that this is multiplied by, 10, 20, 100 students. That right there, you really said something that has given me a lot to think about.
And just to reiterate, and we're going to come back to you and introduce yourself the next time. Just to reiterate, this is a conversation, right? There is no panel because you are the experts on these issues. So if something is said that resonates with you, just shoot your hand up and we're going to get to you, okay? So we're going to go here and come back over here. And introduce yourself, yes.
Yeah, my name is Brent Hudson. I'm an artist, and then I work in the schools too. I worked with second graders for like 5 months. From December until May, and I work for Holistic Life Foundations right now also, and we're doing like yoga, mindfulness, and meditation, and breath work with a lot of the youth, and I've worked in youth works also, and there's a thing about resources and getting stuff to the kids, and even middle schoolers and high school.
And will you speak up for me?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, even getting the resources, I feel like it's also important to do a good follow-up and make sure we understand the value of what we're getting so we don't waste it, because all this money and all this stuff can be put in, but we still need to, go over those like basic skills of understanding this is something we haven't had before, and we need to hold on to and really appreciate these new resources we get, because we'll just have to keep replacing it even if we do get it. And that happens a lot when I worked. I mean, I'll bring in my own books and stuff, but I had to make them really value it and work for those resources and understand why I gave it to them, so they can have value in those journals that I gave them sometimes.
Thank you for saying that,
yep.
because that goes to the fifth focus area from the Kirwan Commission around accountability and governance, right? That it's not just about giving more money, it's about how are we using the money and do we
Yes.
know what the outcomes are for it. So thank you for that direct example. We're gonna go here and then we'll come back to you.
I'm Gail Carney, community member. And my question for the young people is, what should school feel like? And what would it take to have it feel like a place where you want to go and be?
You looked at me, so you get to answer. That's also something you don't do in the classroom. Don't look at the teacher. She's going to call your name. And actually, I'm going to give this to you. I'm going to break the rule, right? All right.
All around, I just feel like school should feel comfortable. Like, it should be a safe environment for everybody to go to, because people from all around Baltimore, they don't have that type of feeling at home where they can go to their moms or, go to their moms or go to their dads and talk about stuff. So school should just feel comfortable. And like my peer Nina was saying, just not diverse around children, but teachers also. So because from my personal experience, me having like not only African American teachers, but teachers who I could just connect to and go to and talk to, and they could actually feel like they're there for me, not only for teaching, but my personal issues. I just feel like it's better for me coming out with a higher grade because I have a connection to my teacher than just a teacher who do their job and teach me instead of having a personal connection to me. Oh, Jordan Bennett.
Thank you, Jordan. My daughter Jordan is sitting behind you, so I feel the love coming that you want in your schools. Jordan rules. So can we get to this young lady?
Hi, my name is Angel. I'm with the intersection, and then I go to a Baltimore City school. To piggyback off of what my colleague Jordan and Nina said, I feel as though that when you walk into a school, you shouldn't feel like, because usually when I'm in the halls, I see people like, oh my God, I just want to go home. I want to go home. You shouldn't want to go home when you're in school. You should want to learn. And I feel like that's where we need to start. And also, I feel like having diverse teachers does help, because how can you like teach something and you're not like from like where you teach? Like you can't like relate, like your students can't relate to you. So I feel like having diversity and having like teachers actually like just like relate to you, so you can like you want to go to class and you want to learn and you just feel a bond with your teacher, so you could like achieve more in that class.
And you said your name is Angel?
Angel.
Angel. Yes. Thank you. All right. Will we get to the elder here? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Powell, and I'm a retired teacher at Matthew Henson Elementary School, West Baltimore, and the community is Easterwood. And I still go there every day. So I retired 2 years ago, and I still go there because there is still work to do. And again, I want to echo some of the comments that have been made before, that it's not just the children who need wraparound services, it's families. And I know that Baltimore City is doing a lot more now than the things that were done in 2000, but we still need more because families are facing generational trauma. So it's, you know, it's not just the children, but it's families that have gone through trauma in terms of these poverty and health issues. And I just feel that we need more mental health services in the community. We can't have social workers maybe at the school twice.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll take your question here. I'm going to stand with you. Come on, stand up. Tell me your name.
So my name is Roxanne. Can I hold this for a second? Is it okay if I hold it?
Are you going to get the disease?
I'm not going to get the disease.
All right.
So just to add on to what Gail said, so specifically about mental health services, I feel, and this isn't quite related to the original question, but To give a personal example, I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 9 because I was in a position of privilege so that my parents could afford to pay for neurological testing, but a lot of families don't have that. And so because I got diagnosed when I was 9 and I had that privilege, I received treatment and I received the resources that I needed to succeed. But there are a lot of people who don't have those services, who may have depression or anxiety, or may also have ADHD like myself, and they just never receive those services or that testing to originally, and so they never get the help that they need. So I just wanted to pair it off of that mental health is a really important aspect of that people should have access to in education.
Did you tell us your name?
Yes, my name is Roxanne.
Thank you, Roxanne. All right, Nina, come on. And for those of you watching live, when we talk about the disease, there's a disease that people get when they touch microphones that extend their comments well beyond what's fair for others in the audience. So people are trying to manage their own wellness.
Okay, I just wanted to add on to what she had previously said in terms of like the family support, because I find that when I go to back to school night, actually back to school night is happening right now at my school, but most times it's only a handful of parents. And, when I go and talk to other people, it's like, yeah, my mom couldn't come, my dad couldn't come because they have to work. And it's like, I feel like there's a gap between the classroom and the actual family home and what's going on between there. And I think to really understand what might be going on with the student is to actually reach out to the family and see what's going on with the family. And I think that there needs to be a connection between the two, because sometimes it's true that some people need extra help and some people don't even have the family support like how I may have with my mother. And the fact that she can afford to take off a day of work and meet my teachers or go to different parent teacher conferences, because she just has the ability to do that. But I think that in terms of just bettering our students and just bettering the youth period in Baltimore City schools is to actually reach out more to the families and communicate to them what's going on with the child, what's going on in school, so that there isn't a kind of a burst at the end, why is my child failing? And they come in at the end of the year and it's like, well, I don't know what to tell you, they haven't been coming to class, stuff like that. So I think that there needs to be some communication on all fronts.
Thanks, Nina. So I'm hearing a lot about whole child supports, and thank you for joining us. Dr. Santelises, our CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools. Whole child supports is, okay, she deserves it. So whole child supports is one of the 3 pillars of Baltimore City Public Schools blueprint, right? And I hear a lot about community schooling as a model, and that is something that's been lifted up in the recommendations from the Kirwan policies. And I hear a lot about mental health and trauma-informed care, which is, a jargony way to say what you were talking about, Roxanne, and some of the others, that it is critical that we meet people where they are, that we don't allow people to fall off, and some of that is going to come from funding. So with that said, I want to pivot a little bit specifically to the policy recommendations from Kirwan. Are there recommendations you either heard in the video or that you are familiar with that you really think need to be prioritized to get us where we want to get in terms of the schools that we want to see? Roxanne? You can hold it.
I'll hold it, okay. Yeah. So I think the most important thing that we could possibly do in terms of education is to provide more resources for preschoolers and, in kindergartners, because that's where the fundamentals of the rest of your education are in preschool and kindergarten. So I was looking over some statistics recently, and from a 2018 spring report, more than 63% of kindergartners were already falling behind expectations for literacy. And that's not okay. That's not something that you can allow to happen, because how do they go on from there? They go on, and education is going to be incredibly hard, through middle school, elementary school, high school. So I think preschool and kindergartner, preschool and early education is the most important thing that you could possibly get.
Thank you, Roxanne. Frank? Can we get a mic over here? Please introduce yourself also.
Hi, I'm Frank Patinella. I'm an advocate with the ACLU of Maryland. Also a parent of a kindergartner, my 6-year-old boy. So he's new student in city schools. I think just tying your last question and this question together, Kirwan Commission has been talking about additional resources for at-risk students, after-school programming, and all kinds of resources. And I just wanted to make sure that we have a conversation about not just the deficit-based approaches that we've been talking about. It's very important to have social workers and address mental health issues and trauma and so forth. But when I was also a social worker before I was an advocate with the ACLU in a high school in Baltimore City. And I worked with kids that had, well, they would come to me and or be referred to me, and they were told they had certain deficits, right, or needs. But I always found the best way to engage them was through music or art and things like that, and they had a much easier time relating to me and working through their issues through those kinds of mediums. So I just want to make sure that we're also thinking about the assets that the students already have and providing those kinds of resources and opportunities for those students. And this is what middle-class families and wealthy families provide for their children already, right? They have music lessons after school, additional music lessons or tutors, other enrichment activities. These things should be provided in schools, just standard across the board.
Thank you. Anyone else? Kirwan Commission, which policies should we be prioritizing? Sis, I'm going to ask you to come this way.
Thank you.
Actually, if you will come around here, let's make sure we can see you on camera, and we'll get you in. Yep.
Thank you. I'm Lisa Rawlings. I work for University of Maryland, Baltimore, and I'm a doctoral student at Morgan State's School of Education. And for me, and I'm not familiar with the Kirwan report, but I'm familiar with what happens in school districts, be it Baltimore City, Baltimore County, or all over Maryland. The schools in the rich neighborhoods get most of the resources, and it should be the opposite. The schools where the children have the most need should get the most resources. We've got to move away from a model where folks who have the most access to power get the most access to resources.
Right. Thank you, Lisa. And what Lisa just talked about, again, I'm going to keep pointing us back to that, is the concept of equity. Oftentimes we hear people talk about equality in education, and equality will never get us where we need to go. The difference is that equity makes sure we take into account that some people are starting behind the 8 ball, and behind the 8 ball might be genocide or enslavement or coming as a new American, speaking another language. It could be a myriad of things, but to expect that people just show up and that if you give them equal, they're going to be able to thrive doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so we've been talking about equity. I'd love to ask the folk in the room how you think the Kirwan Commission should be taking a look at equity, and also in particular race equity. And if any of our advocates want to push in here and talk a little bit about any work that's been done or still needs to be done, I'd love to hear from you. So, yes, sir.
Well, my feeling in terms of race equity, I come from the same generation as Margaret. I think all of the teachers in my elementary school, Edgewood Elementary School, were black. And that's not to say black teachers are better than white teachers, but one of the statistics that I saw on the video reflected that only like 25% of the teachers in the Baltimore City public school system are black.
And across the state.
Okay, across the state, thank you for that.
Higher in Baltimore City public schools, but still not reflective of the student population.
And the disparity there is damning to the entire system. And I'm not saying necessarily that black teachers tend to care more about black children, but it sure seemed that way to me. And I had, well, I'll cut to the chase. You know, just last week I had my 50th anniversary with my classmates from Lamell Junior High School.
Wow.
And that's the same junior high school that Ta-Nehisi Coates attended. I was just in this room just a couple days ago with his father, Paul Coates. And Ta-Nehisi Coates was compared favorably to James Baldwin. So this is, you know, the stuff that reminds us that we have the strength of queens and kings in our wings. And I'm just very fortunate to be here with y'all. And I also went to the Baltimore City, the Baltimore City College High School.
I feel obliged to say city forever, even though I did
City
not
forever.
go. Okay.
But Jordan rules, so the Jordans rule.
Christina?
Hi, my name is Christina Duncan Evans, and I was first a teacher and now a librarian in Baltimore City Schools. When I hear the young people talk about technology, when I hear the young people talk about diversity in the staff and also in the student body, I think that the Kirwan Commission doesn't necessarily appreciate how labor-intensive all of these things are, the social emotional support, the feeling of comfort and safety that make all learning and risk-taking possible. Social risk-taking, academic risk-taking, all of that has to come from a place of comfort and safety. It's very labor-intensive to build those kinds of environments for our children. We don't often, when we buy technology, properly account for the training and maintenance that needs to happen, and it's the same thing when we're building people. One place where I think the Kirwan Commission can really take a closer look with a race equity lens is how they're talking about high quality teaching. I think that they put a lot of effort into thinking about harder tests for teacher to pass, national board certification, but they haven't looked at the fact that the people with some of the strongest social emotional skills in our schools, our paraprofessionals, our school aides, are not mentioned in the report. So if they're thinking about raising standard teaching salary or the starting teaching salary to match lawyers and accountants, but completely leaving out an incredibly skilled set of people in our schools, then they don't have a full understanding of who is doing the work and how many people are involved in making children strong and smart and beautiful. I mean, they're already beautiful.
Thank you, Christina. Yes. Can we pass the mic back to Dr. Santelises right here? Thank you.
Quickly, since I knew Christina had the mic, I was trying to do it quickly. I think one of the things that I would like for the Kirwan Commission to really double down on is this idea that if we really are going to address issues of equity, it is not about just adding a community coordinator to a school. And as you know, Baltimore City Public Schools, we believe in community schools. It's not just about adding a mental health professional. One of the things that we did as a school district was we went through all of the major areas of Kirwan and said, if we're really going to assess the impact of poverty, of racially based disinvestment over a period of time, then going back to something Frank said, we have to account for it in everything. So when we looked, for example, at college and career counseling, we looked at it from the perspective of not just what is the national recommended ratio of a guidance counselor to a number of students. We said, what would that ratio be if you had a first-generation college goer, right, who has a mom or a dad who's working 3 jobs, right, who has never set foot on a college campus? That ratio has to be smaller than it would be for those of us who might be 2nd or 3rd generation college goers. When we are talking about the arts, we need to take into account that if we're going to deal with, again, the compounded impact of poverty and systematic disinvestment, then we have to take into account for young people who don't have somebody at home because the resources are going for basic necessities of life. That means the music and art offerings at school have to be even more enriched. And so part of what we've done is gone through every area, and I would really encourage the Kirwan Commission to not look in 1 or 2 places and say, now we've checked the racial equity box or we've checked the poverty box because we did thing 1 or thing 2. It's looking comprehensively at, based on what all these young people are describing, what are all of the factors that have to be put in place rather than just 1 or 2 areas.
Yeah, thank you. I'll go here.
You want me to introduce myself again?
No.
Okay.
We know you now. We go way back.
So I just wanted to add on to the statement that she made about it's not just 1 or 2 boxes. It takes a community to raise our children. So it's not just the teachers, it's not just the technology, and it's not just the counselors. I know when I've grown up in Baltimore City schools, the people that we usually come to is not usually the counselors or the teachers. It's the hall monitors, the people that you see in the halls that provide the student support. It's more than just the teachers and the counselors and the principals or the technology. It's the people, the coaches, you know, the people that have day-to-day interactions with these students. Everybody is a part of that. And I think the Kirwan Commission should look at everybody, not just, you know, one or two. It's a community. The whole school as a whole should be looked at and uplifted.
Thank you. So I want to make sure that we are really zeroing in on the different aspects of the Kirwan Commission. And we have Senator Bill Ferguson here, and I want to ask folk about how they've learned about the Kirwan Commission and how they've engaged in the process in order to inform the policies and what they expect to come out of this next legislative session in 2019. So Bill, will you talk a little bit about just the pathway forward for the recommendations?
Sure. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks for everybody for joining tonight. So let's see. Right now, we are in the process, and I say we, let me say sort of as the General Assembly. There was the initial study done that was required back from 2002 that said that there was a $2.9 billion gap between where we should be to provide an adequate education to where we are as of 2018. That was a big number, and so the legislature responded with a commission to figure out what that actually means. So that is the commission that we are in and a part of currently. That commission was supposed to have a final report in December. It was pushed back. There was an interim report that was pushed back until, in theory, September. That has now been pushed back a little bit further until what is likely to be November or December. That will be a report from a commission. And so I think it's very important to understand the difference between the report from the commission and what is actually would have to happen to change something, which is passing a bill. And so these recommendations are very, very important. They will set the bar. They'll sort of set the end zones and the out of bounds. They'll sort of lay the field, and then from January through April, the legislature will be in the place of responding to that report to pass a bill or several bills to see those recommendations or other recommendations enacted. And I also want to make the point that there's sort of two different areas to keep in mind. One are the policies. So there are policies that will be changed, dealing with teacher recruitment or hiring and community schools or early childhood. That's the policy side. But then there is the funding side. And it's very easy to talk about the policy. Where the big fight will be is in the funding. And that's not just getting to a certain total amount, it's also the funding and distribution across and between jurisdictions in the state. So, there's a lot of complicated landmines, political landmines, but I would say January to April, that's the ballgame. If it doesn't happen, I would be very, very concerned that we would actualize this potential moment.
Why don't we go up here and then we'll come across. We'll start with Gil.
I have a question, a little confusion. So the Thornton recommendations were never fully funded, true?
That's correct.
So we have a history of not fully funding. So it doesn't make me particularly optimistic about the difference between policies and funding. And then how do we impact funding, which just seems to be where the rubber meets the road, where the money goes.
Anyone want to push into that question about impact on funding? I'm happy to go back to you, Bill, or come on, Roxanne.
Specifically, I'm wondering, this is just more of a logistical thing, but who is it that originally comes up with a budget that then later gets to be changed and edited by committees and such?
I see, Shannon, were you looking at me? Frank was looking at me, one of you? Yes? No. Let's get Frank.
The governor comes up with the budget, and that's usually dropped as a bill, filed as a bill for the legislature to debate and vote on. That starts somewhere mid-January. But spending, the governor has to put certain spending items in the budget bill, right? And that's determined largely by the legislature. So I think in terms of the funding and Gail's question is that we have to put pressure on mostly the Democratic legislature. They have to be bold and not go into the fight already compromised, right? Because they believe something's politically impossible. So it's a matter of just being bold and sticking to the vision that the youth and the community members have laid out and making sure that that's funded. Right.
And so what responsibility does our Baltimore delegation have to the community to make that happen? Anyone should feel free. Did you want to jump back in, Nina? Hold on.
That is a separate question. I was actually going to Oh, okay. So my main question is, this past summer that the intersection has been advocating for the lockbox fund because previously our funds have been misused. They have been transferred and used as a replacement rather than an addition to our budget. So this concern about funding, I also share with the lady in the back. And more importantly, I'm sitting here as I went through and I looked at the facts and I was doing research. I sat there and wondered why it took us about 20 years to rethink the way that we go about education funding. The fact that Thornton Commission was so long ago, and now that we're, even after the, as the video says, the 2008 economic depression, why it took us 18 years to say, oh yes, let us rethink the way that we spend money in the education. So I'm I'm more concerned about the funding and moving forward, that if we were to have another economic depression or a major event like that, the fact that we shouldn't have to wait, 10 years in order for us to rethink it, and instead develop a plan of, in case this happens, what should we do then? So these safety precautions that are, or safety placements that are placed in the future for possibilities.
So I want to ask, do you know what the next steps are for the lockbox proposal?
Geez, you put me on the spot there.
On the spot.
On the spot. Actually, right now I believe that we are still trying to get it. I think we're pressing for it to become a constitutional amendment so that it's a lot harder for it to be moved. But right now I believe that it's still going through the legal proceedings and it actually hasn't reached the point of us actually being able to vote.
So I got to tell you something, Nina. It is going to be on the ballot on November 6th. So what I hear you saying is people need to go vote and not stay at home to vote for the lockbox amendment to ensure that people can't play a shell game with our money, make sure that the money is not being supplanted by the casino money, that instead the casino money is a supplement to the state meeting the Article 8 mandate that education is funded. Did you know that Article 8 mandate is the only mandate in the Maryland Constitution?
No, I did not. You just educated me. Look at that.
And so I would think if something is supposed to be funded first, it would be the only mandate in the Maryland Constitution. Do you know what the article is?
I actually don't.
It's Article 8, remember?
Yes, I know. Well, you just told me it was Article 8.
So what do you want people to do about the lockbox?
I definitely want you to go out and vote. I want you to go out, register to vote. I want you to go out there and vote because this is for the security of our money for our kids in our city.
I'll take you anywhere, Nina. All right. Shannon?
Hi, I'm Shannon Coleman Siciliano with Strong Schools Maryland. So to somewhat answer your question, Kalila, about our Baltimore City representatives, and I'm going to go statewide, and then to also talk about the referendum and the lockbox. The importance of the election on November 6th in regards to the lockbox, it's polling right now that, it's favorable. Marylanders support it, that we should have a mandate that says, where this money is going to go. But the onus for us is to not just pass it with small margins, but to pass it significantly. That then will put the pressure on and prove to our legislators that education really does matter for our state. And to allow our legislators to know that Marylanders not only support education, but when they have to go next session to make the hard decisions to raise taxes, to fund the Kirwan Commission, that Marylanders are watching because they supported the lockbox bill, they support additional funding towards education in a major way. And so our legislators then will be looking to us on November 6th to make sure that we make that vote and that we make it in a big way. And then we can then turn back to our legislators to say, we've supported this and we need you to stick to this and to pass this and to make the difficult decisions this legislative session. I tend to be one of a glass half full person, and I tend to be optimistic. And I feel as though this is a significant moment in Maryland's history, and if we do not do and put the pressure on that's needed this next legislative session, then it is a significant missed opportunity for all of the kids in Maryland.
So thank you for that. And let's go to Christina. I just want to remind the people watching live to share your thoughts in the comment section. We're going to get to your comments. And watching on YouTube or using Twitter, hashtag TRNN Education. We'll get to some of your questions in a few. Christina?
To be a government teacher, so I can't resist. When Thornton passed when Thornton made its recommendations in 2002, it took a long time for full funding to get to the schools, and then it was immediately cut because of the recession. That was 2002 to 2007, 2008, right? And that's because when large amounts of money are moved around in a budget, it's usually done slowly over time. So I'm looking at you, high school students. If you want this money, you need to tell your legislators that you want it now, that you deserve it now. Because I want to give you an example of how this lockbox is going to work. Your parents originally voted for slot machines in the state in 2008. When question one passes, full funding will reach Baltimore City Schools in 2022. So your parents voted for this when you were in kindergarten. And full funding will arrive when you will be long out of the school system. If that seems troubling to parents who know that their kids will be gone when this hits Baltimore City Schools, I mean, I'm gonna be here, right? I hope to be in Baltimore City Schools for decades more. But if you know that your time in Baltimore City Schools is about to pass without seeing full funding, then you need to let our elected representatives know that we should be doing funding differently.
Thank you, Christina. And I just want to make sure everybody's clear that the last day to register to vote in Maryland to make sure you can vote in the November election, and this includes anyone who will be 18 by November 6th, is October 16th. So Tuesday, October 16th is the last day you can register to vote so that you can vote on November 6th in this election. Lots of folk are talking about the gubernatorial election being most critical. It is important, but as Nina said, education is the most important matter on the ballot, and it is question one, and we need you to get in those polls and vote for something that's important to you. We go up here.
I just want to take it back to the Kirwan Commission, and maybe this is a later bullet, please let me know. I wonder how this is going to look when it's implemented. Baltimore City Schools has over 100 schools from kindergarten to high school, correct? About 177 schools, is it?
177, okay.
And then you have about 80,000 students as of, what was it, 2018, 2017, something like that. About 78,000. It sounds like you all we have all of these needs. It's a lot of money to put into this particular program to get everything up to par as far as education goes. And I'm a little bit passionate, I'm a little bit angry also at hearing some of these stats and facts. I just want to know, how is this going to look? I am surprised to learn that the Kirwan Commission is going to just delegate somebody else as to how it's going to look facilities-wise. I don't see why anybody would put that kind of money and spread it all around into all of these different schools where there's underpopulated schools, overpopulated schools. It seems like we need another type of structure in place instead of having all of these neighborhood schools. Maybe have campuses in and around Baltimore City. Bring things down. If we got to build new, build new. I need some other ideas other than just what I am seeing, just building upon old systems. How is the Kirwan Commission going to actually implement this facilities-wise?
Did you want to answer that, Frank? Okay. All right. We'll go back to you, Frank. Yeah, no, it's okay. And then we'll come back to you.
Well, the Kirwan Commission is just, their original purpose was to address the education funding formula, which the only thing facilities related in that formula is about maintenance, repair, funding custodial workers, and there's something else. Operations like keeping the lights on. So the other part of the budget is the capital budget. So the school district has an operating budget and a capital budget. The operating budget was for the things I just mentioned, the small repairs and maintenance. The capital budget has to do with the large capital projects, and it's funded completely differently than the operating budget, and the Kirwan Commission is not charged with that. Dr. Harris said that there was a NOT commission, which kind of, they finished their work, and House Bill 1783, is that right, Senator? Passed last session. Now there's work that the Interagency Committee on School Construction, it's a state entity that oversees school construction statewide. My group that I work for, the ACLU, has been calling out the state and the State Interagency Commission on the unfair practices of how they distribute capital dollars to school construction. And the reason why we see county schools like Howard County and other counties, their facility conditions being much better than Baltimore City's, and we have the oldest school buildings and the most efficient school buildings in the state. And the reason for that is due to local wealth. If you look at a similar sized school district, Anne Arundel County, roughly the same amount of students and schools as Baltimore City, they have at least 5 times, I think 6, 7 times more local wealth for school construction and infrastructure than Baltimore City. And that's just a function of wealth. It's kind of like comparing me to, say, the president, right? He has a lot more ability to...
I don't want to compare you to the president. Not on today.
Right. Well, in this way...
How about Barack Obama? He has more money than you.
Okay. Yes. He can spend. He can buy, say, a much larger house and maintain it and provide for, and repair the roof or replace the roof when the life cycle of that roof is up. Repair the mechanical systems or replace them. It's the same thing between Baltimore City and Howard County or Anne Arundel County. It's just they have that much more capital dollars to make sure that their buildings are in good repair, and Baltimore City doesn't, and the state does not equitably distribute funding to make sure Baltimore City has the funds that, say, the wealthier counties do.
And a part of that is using property taxes to fund schools exacerbates the wealth gap, right? And so to say you can only have enough for schools based on the income tax or the property tax of the people in your community is a challenge, and it is regressive. It is not progressive, and I think that's something else for us to think about is how we are really funding all schools across the state, especially since a lot of wealth is generated in Baltimore City and taken out of the city, right? And so people work in the city and take that wealth to Howard County, Baltimore County, Montgomery County, and then turn back to Baltimore and say, why do you always have your hand out? What do you need money for? Well, You're here every day. You tell me what we need money for. So there are other jurisdictions like Washington, D.C. that taxes the people who live outside of the district to help support the district having the funding it needs to support its citizens. And so, you know, Maryland is not a state that is lacking resources, right? And so when we think about funding, the idea that there isn't enough or that there's a scarcity is patently false. And instead, we have people navigating the conversation from a standpoint that we don't have enough, and so how much can we give to Baltimore? Oh, Wycomico County, you can't get any more because Baltimore has its handout. It's like, actually, there's enough for all of them, especially if, based on Article 8, the singular mandate in our Constitution, right, Nina? Yes, that we fund schools first, right? There will always be enough for all of the kids who need it if we prioritize it in the way the authors of our Constitution thought we should. So I want to take a question from, and I'm going to get to you, Roxanne. I want to take a question from Schultzy100, who posted on YouTube, and this is back to the lockbox. Is the lockbox a controversy, or is it getting a lot of support? So those of you who have a sense of it, Senator Ferguson, if you want to weigh in, we are joined by Delegate Brooke Learman. Thank you for being here with us. Anybody in the legislature, Dr. Santelises, anyone else who has their ear to the ground, want to talk about their sense of the support for the lockbox?
So I would say overall, it is not controversial. And I think Shannon made a great point that the level of support that question 1 receives, I don't want to make the assumption that it will pass. So let's say it should pass. I think the margin by which it passes will be illustrative as to how Marylanders feel about additional investments in education. I do want to make the point, though, that I think, especially in the education advocacy community, there's a sort of a misnomer that this would be new money. It would be new money for education, but it is $500 million that is currently in other programs. So one of the other, probably the second largest area that the state budget funds is healthcare access. So the $500 million that is currently being utilized, but not for education, is being utilized for things like the Children's Health Insurance Program. And so when that money is reallocated to education, it creates a gap that exists. And so I don't want people to think that this is new money that is being added in. It's part of a much larger package. And the other thing is the Kirwan recommendations are significantly, the costs of what is being talked about are significantly more than what would come with question 1. And so I'm a bit apprehensive that people think that if we vote for question 1, it will fund Kirwan. It is a first step at best for education purposes, and there is going to be a much broader and bigger conversation around the revenues that are needed to meet the real investments that will be needed to be sufficient.
So, Senator Ferguson, I want to push you, though. Let's hold on to the microphone. When you say there will be a significant gap for things like the CHIP program, that gap is man-made. It is not a gap because we lack the resources to also fund that. Is that correct, or?
Yes, absolutely. I mean a gap in just the sense of a balanced budget.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify, because that is often what some people say to their constituents to garner their support. Well, if we move money to fund schools, we won't have the money for CHIP, which is not accurate, right?
Agreed. It just means that it will require us to raise revenue. And I think that's the part that is very important. And that's why passing this makes the statement that Marylanders are willing to raise revenue to invest in education. So the margin by which question 1 passes, I think, it will be indicative to the incoming, or to legislators coming into session, that this is an issue that has to be taken care of.
Great, thank you. Did anybody else want to comment on this thread? Yes, come on, Roxanne.
I was just going to say that I think in our work, we found that probably the main obstacle for question 1 is going to be just that people don't know about it. When we're knocking on doors and stuff, a lot of people have not heard about it in the least. A couple of people have said something like, oh, gambling is against my religion. It's like, well, this doesn't really affect that anyway, but I don't think that's a real problem. I think the real problem is, as Senator Ferguson and others were saying, that not only do people not know about it, but also I guess there's a little bit of, in terms of where that funding is coming from. I guess that's the problem.
Why don't you stay standing for me, Roxanne? Whose responsibility is it to make sure that people are aware of what's at stake?
Probably the government itself. And I think that reflects in other areas as well. For instance, I think, and for myself, speaking for myself, I had really no idea there was a governor's primary in June until like the week before. So the point being that I think it should be on the government to make a lot more of an effort to get the word out about there is an election happening, in this instance, next month or 2 months from now. It might look something like, hey, everyone, there's going to be something really important on the ballot in about 2 weeks, so be prepared to vote for that, or vote for or against that, whatever.
Thank you, Rex. And Nina, you wanted to contribute to that?
I get to hold it now? Okay. So as we were canvassing around the neighborhoods surrounding our school, all of the intersection kids go to Bard High School Early College. So that area around it, we all canvassed, registering people to vote, trying to educate them about the lockbox fund. And we found that there was just a lack of trust in the government, especially after the actions of not actually putting the money where they're supposed to go. So it's like, a lot of the questions we received was, how can I trust that it will actually go this way as you are telling me that it will? Or will it just be another lie? The fact that, again, my child does not have enough money and their school does not have enough money for textbooks and the latest technology, or, they don't have enough money to support quality teachers, or, so I think that's what we all found while we were canvassing around these neighborhoods. So that's all I wanted to add.
Stay with me. Who's responsible of making sure people understand what's at stake?
I definitely think that it is a shared, because I think as citizens of the city, you should want to be engaged with what is going on in your legislation. And you should want to be engaged with what's going on in your city council and things that directly affect your community. So on that, I believe that you should want to, ooh, did I mess it up? Oh, okay.
Switch.
Okay.
Oh, hello? All right, somebody's trying to stop Nina's thunder.
Okay. But in that, did it happen again?
Is it okay? I'm gonna give this back to you.
Okay. In that case, I do think that it is the responsibility of the citizen to be an active citizen and want to take part in these things. But I also feel like it is on, I want to say the word like the government, like this big, broad thing, but to actually reach out to the community and say, like, these are things that's going on, these are things that could help you, and these are things that could help your children in the long run. So I think that it's a shared obligation on both hands to just be engaged and active in what is going on that can directly affect us.
Okay, look, all the elders are like, listen, the government is made of actual people, and I have something to say about that. Can we start with Dr. Santelitas, and then we'll go around to all four of you.
I am normally a glass half empty person, but right now I'm going to channel some glass half full.
Good.
And I do think that we have to look back to states that have successfully funded their schools. And we need to look to the mobilization of people and the power that takes. And I actually, and I'm not saying other folks around the state didn't care about Kirwan, but I remember coming here 2 years ago, and no one was talking about Kirwan, except maybe like Delegate Lehrman or Senator Ferguson, but people weren't talking. I mean, I was running into people, they were like, Kirwan? What is Kirwan? And because we had busloads of young people, of parents, of community members and advocates pile on buses, go to the state, begin asking questions, suddenly the lockbox that had been hidden in darkness for years, people are like, well, wait a minute, what happened to that? And it was because people asked the question that somebody had to give an answer. And so I think the goal is to present a clear choice to the citizens of this state and to choose at a moment in history, as everyone has said, will you fund education or will you not? And by the way, it's not a one moment in time answer. We actually are watching. So when I leave Bard Early College High School and I go off to university, or I go off to make far more money than the CEO makes right now, right? Like when you go off to do all of that, that you are still watching. Because people who watch their government are less likely to go down without a fight. And I just, like I said, it's funny for me to be saying this because I tend to be with you. Well, you know, they didn't have the money before. But we have examples of that. And even in the state of Massachusetts, right? I was there when it was put on the ballot 20 years ago of whether there was going to be funding, right? An additional influx of money into public education. And across the state, by the way, after the same citizens that had voted to cut education with Prop 2.5 when I was going into high school, voted a couple years later after the drama clubs were cut, after there was no more middle school sports teams, they said, wait a minute, that didn't work for us, and refunded what was cut and gave more. And now in that same state, they're saying, wait a minute, we did that 15 years ago. We need to do that again. So when I went back home, what was on political radio was it's time to re-ante up again. So I want to infuse a little power and agency into the room because there are historical and current examples of when people watch the government and hold us as a public employee and servant, right, accountable. There is a power and there is a precedent for this.
I'm going to actually start with Margaret and bounce back and forth. Yep, there you go.
I'm sharing this with the people out in the community. So not only am I a retired teacher, but I'm secretary of the Neighborhood Association because I live right around the corner from my school. Has nothing to do with I never learned how to drive, but so I live right around the corner from my school. And we engage the students to participate in the electoral process by finding out how many people who are registered to vote at my school actually come out to vote. So in the last gubernatorial election, we know that only 27%, less than 27% of the people voted. So we're sending that information to the parents and letting them know that only 27% is not enough. And so we're encouraging them to come out, and not that we're shaming parents and grandparents about not coming out, but just letting them know that. So when you're canvassing, if you can tell them that only a certain number of people, and you can find that out from the Board of Elections, right. Just call them and say, in the last gubernatorial, how many people voted? And so then the conversation can come up about the lockbox, but you're giving them data, which is important, because they don't know how many people came out and voted at
A lot of times people
precinct.
assume, well,
They
other
don't-
people are voting,
That's right.
I can stay home.
Right, so, and if you want to see me after, I can give you a format that you can work with the schools. It's not too late to work with the schools to find out how many people actually voted at if that's the polling place or wherever it is. But I can share information with you to make that. And then my students actually come out and actually count the voters because they have to they have to answer whether they think more people are going to come out to vote between 7 to 10, 10 to 1, 1 to 4, or 4 to 8. So they make their prediction and then they say why. They have to write why they did this. So this is still about literacy.
So interactive and engaging our young people in
so then
civics.
They want to prove that they're correct. So then the parents have to sign another slip where your child wants to come out and count the voters. And they actually have tables outside of the polling place. They have their little tally sheets, and they're counting the people who come in to vote. And every year that we've been doing this, it always goes up. Are we where we want to be? No. But it increases each time. And so the students think, I had something to do with that because I counted them, I made predictions, I had something to do with that.
So we have instant solutions over here, right? Let's go up here. Is there a microphone here? Oh.
I just wanted to comment, kind of piggyback off of something that Nina said earlier about whose responsibility is it. I think she was answering your question about whose responsibility is it to make sure that the community is engaged and informed. And you mentioned government, you know, a big, broad thing. My experience has only been with Baltimore County Public Schools. As far as raising my son. I used to go to Baltimore City Public Schools many years ago now. But a lot of the things that you all are speaking of are things that I actually experienced when it came to my son in Baltimore County. Some of the information being put out there to the parents is wrong. There is a parallel enrollment program with Community College of Baltimore County that is open for incoming freshmen. So if you graduate 8th grade or you move along from the 8th grade, that summer you take the assessment test at the community college. If you meet college level requirements, you can start taking college courses starting in the 9th grade. Do you know how many guidance counselors told me that that was wrong? That you have to actually be a junior in order to start taking classes at the parallel enrollment program. This has been going, and now my son has graduated. He actually graduated early. He enrolled in a program and came out his junior year in high school. I was very furious about that. I don't know how hard I cannot put into words how hard it was to even find out information just about upward bound programs at the various local colleges. This type of information just needs to be plastered in the guidance offices, just talked about amongst the parents, in the community, advocates, teachers. It doesn't matter who's saying it. We need people to say it. So when you say it's government's responsibility, I do agree. I also feel that there are others who need to make sure that it's not just, and no disrespect everybody, I understand politics is important. Politics is very important to me too. Voting is important. But you also gotta know how you are going to live if your candidate doesn't win, if your program doesn't win. I need you all, young people, to ask the hard questions. Follow the bouncing ball. Also follow the money too, and see if you're actually going to see the fruits of all of your labor, or will it be your children? And I really do appreciate the information you put out there, because the looks on your faces was, I'm not going to see the results, but still reach back and fight for the next generation who will.
Thank you. Brent? Back here.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like everything is kind of tied in all around the same basis. But like at the end of the day, like we can rely on the government and everybody else to fund us to do whatever, but we still need to be a strong community, and that's parents and the youth that has all those fancy phones, and we can get all these necessities, but we still got to focus on getting education so we can like be better prepared to do these jobs in any position, no matter what age you are. I mean, there needs to be more people that's trying to do entrepreneurships so we can fund our stuff, even if this stuff don't go through. Because like I'm 26, I ain't got time to wait on nobody, no funding to help me out, because I got to go to the library, read something, understand something, be ready, more prepared to organize or like help another person that needs to know the information I just got. That's speaking up, using our social media accounts, using all that, walking across the street, acknowledging each other, talking, communicating. Like that's the one thing that's going to hold us down. Whether this fall through or not, it doesn't matter. Because as long as we got each other and actually like, trying to like get somewhere that we may not see that future now, but it's going to come about faster than you think. We just got to sit together, work with the small ones, work with the teenagers, adults, and even help our elders. Like I'm helping my grandmother trying to I'm looking stuff on the laptop. She's trying to learn prebiotics, probiotics. I'm like, boom, I got my Apple right here. I'm telling you all about it. It don't take that long. We got the technology to do it. It's about really wanting to do it. That's all I got to say.
Yep. You can pass the mic. And I hear you talking about collective works, right? That, and to your point, Nina, as well, around shared responsibility. And the government, that's a theory, right? There are people in the government, some of them are here with us, and so being specific. But what I'm also hearing is folks say, as a suggestion, that this election needs to be about education and not just a detached gubernatorial election. So I'm going to have you respond, but also go to the next question around the governor's race. But please.
Glad you brought up the term collective, because that's something that we don't hear enough of. And I'm going to jump around to several things, but at the age of 65, I say to you all that Kirwan reminds me of the Kerner Commission, 1968. I was 14 years old after Martin Luther King was assassinated on April the 4th, 1968, and the streets were on fire. And just today, the elementary school at Hillsdale and Liberty Heights is torn down. And yet we can refurbish many of these old buildings in this city. I'll be the first to admit that I hadn't even heard about lockbox proposals. And I need to read up on this legislation. And I pride myself on being an aware individual. But on this same piece of paper right here, I just simply wrote down, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. That's a quote by Martin Luther King, Jr. Capitalism is vulturistic. Malcolm X said that. Low-cost lunches throughout for low-income folks has to be part of this discussion. Free pre-K, just like de Blasio has pushed in New York, it needs to be part of this discussion. Free community college has to be part of this discussion. Thank goodness that candidate Jealous has brought up free community college. So as we go through this, let's not short stroke and half step, as folks used to say back in the day when I was young.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go back to Christina.
So on the theme of the collective and shared responsibility, one of the biggest questions that I have about the Kirwan Commission is about the accountability. And I think that a little while ago, accountability meant testing. Mm-hmm. And I'm not entirely convinced that we've learned from our last wave of test-heavy accountability for schools. I don't think that there's a consensus around whether or not that was a good thing or a bad thing. And I really wonder what the Kirwan Commission means when they talk about accountability. Because when I think about accountability, I quite honestly don't get far because I'm not that imaginative, but I do imagine something democratic, and I imagine the kind of accountability that I have to my family and the people who I really care about. The people who I show up for from a place of obligation that comes from the heart and aligns with my values, and that's really different from the drives that make people chase merit pay or high status or other types of things. And so my question for the room is, what would accountability look like if we were to design it? Because I honestly don't think it's going to come from Annapolis, a system that makes sure people do what they're supposed to do, because the master's tools cannot destroy the master's house. And I don't think that the people in Annapolis are equipped to build an accountability system that really aligns with the values of the people in this room. So for people in this room, young people who are more imaginative, how do we make sure that the adults do what they're supposed to do?
Thanks so much for that, Christina. And one of the questions from the audience watching live is around the fact that Maryland is no longer going to use the PARC assessment to evaluate young people. And, you know, back when we had, I hear the students in the room are saying, thank God. During the civil rights movement, testing was a strategy that civil rights activists surfaced because there was not equity and the quality of education, right? And now we see decades later, it's kind of used as a sword instead of a shield against those very same young people who are deserving of quality schools and not having families, you know, tiptoeing around hidden curriculum that they can't ever really see. And the hidden curriculum is, where do they get access to gifted education? Who does have access to IB and AP courses? Why would it be important for my young child to go to Twigs and participate in the arts? How is that going to help their brains developmentally? And as long as they don't know, and the people with the resources do know, we find ourselves in a constant situation of trying to legislate collective work and community and accountability that feels like family when it may not. And so I want to open that question up to the room. And if you have an answer, Roxanne, I will. Christina asked about what accountability should look like to get us to the place where we have schools that reflect what the community desires. Yeah. You're not sure if you want to take a stab at it? You want to try? Sure. I feel like I'm on the debate team. Rexon's about to take me out. So it is, in order for there to be the types of schools that we want to see and that we believe all of the young people in our community deserves, what kind of accountability should be in place to make sure that happens? Who should be accountable to who? You know, what rules should they follow to make sure people get what they need? Those kinds of things.
All right, I'll take a stab at it. But I think that the people who are probably going to be the most accountable are, well, for one thing, I would say, actually, you know what, I can't really say that. I was going to say the governor, because the governor originally comes up with the budget, as we clarified earlier. But then I thought, well, the governor doesn't necessarily decide on what, like, where the money goes to individual districts. So I guess that's not really the answer, but maybe the answer lies somewhere more in like a local level, in terms of, you know, that's not right either. I think the responsibility, you know, assuming that we're talking about the same kind of accountability, the responsibility sort of lies in many different places. For example, first, it might land on the governor to make good budgeting choices, and then it might lie on. I had an example and I forgot it, but it might lie on someone who's lower on the level to properly delegate. Okay, where are these funds going? Yes, exactly. Yes, sorry. I'm very not good at following hints. So it's not. I guess there's not really one answer to it. But you want to look at, I guess, everyone who could possibly be responsible for it, enacting budget policy in schools, and it's a bit harsh, but laying the blame on them or the responsibility on them, it doesn't even have to be that harsh. Just asking, why are things this way? As you've answered already. So.
Thank you. Dr. Santelises?
So, and again, this is just from my perspective. I actually don't think we should be afraid of accountability. I think what I heard in your question or the Facebook Live
question about Park.
Thank you, about Park and about accountability, really is trying to unpack a really complex set and a multiple set of factors that people use to determine whether a school's a good school and whether a school is doing right by the young people that attend. Because at its fundamental level, that's what we need, right? So there was a report that was released a couple of days ago called The Opportunity Myth by TNTP. And what was interesting, and this is why I'm bringing it up with lots of young people here, is that most of the data in this big, thick report came from the voices of young people. And there are themes within that get to everything from what a lot of the young people here said about, I should be able to learn in a physical environment that's conducive, but it was also things like, I want the people who are teaching me to have high expectations for me. I want to know that I go to school every day, and if I say that I want to be a doctor or I want to go into a science profession or be an artist, that the path that I'm on authentically leads to that. And I think part of why we have this rub is because we have to admit that there are pieces that contribute to that whole. And the problem, and I'm old, I taught in schools before there was any testing. And I will tell you that there were schools, I was in New York City, that languished, that got away with not educating certain pockets of young people, certain populations of young people, until it was made public. Testing is one way to make things public, but it's not the only thing. And so getting to the question about what do local communities want for their children, I have to tell you, I haven't heard wide variation in what young people want, what families want, in all my time across Baltimore City. I think that it is really tackling, and I think that growth needs to be counted, and maybe I'm a big growth person. If you start with a particular resource and with young people at a particular level, you should get credit as a school community, as a district, for growing young people both academically as well as social emotionally. So I think it is this piece that we want easy answers, and so we shy away from it. And I don't do that, because it really comes down to, are we giving young people what they want? And I'm just going to tell one last story, because I want to be the mic hog, because Kalila will send me a list. But, I was out Saturday before Easter Sunday buying tights or whatever for one of my girls, and across the store, I hear, Dr. Santelises, Dr. Santelises. And I look up, because I'm not in Dr. Santelises mode, I'm buying tights. And a father comes over to me, I have never forgotten this, and said, my daughter graduated from Baltimore City Public Schools. And she wanted to work with children. She wanted a career working with children. And I'll never forget what he said, she did everything you all asked her to do. And now 2 years after graduation, she feels stuck because she's not doing what she thought she would be doing. She's not doing it at the level that she wanted to be doing it. And so for me, that's my accountability. I have accountability to that father, his child, that student went through, did what we asked her to do, and did not land at the space that we promised her she would if she did what we asked her to do. And so that for me is real accountability, but I think we shy away from it. We're like, oh, we don't want too much testing and we don't do much of this. That for me is the bottom line. And we've got to have the courage to pull the pieces apart to get as close to that story as possible.
Thank you. And if I can just meld some of what both you and Christina said, which I don't think are very different, I think there needs to be, and what I've heard is there needs to be a community mechanism for feedback about the quality of schools. And that piece is often left out, and people say, well, I don't know how to do that, or, what would happen? And perhaps it behooves us to make it happen. That community have a real feedback mechanism. I know there are parent surveys and student surveys, but some other visible report card that people can actually see, okay, so it had the survey component, but there was also the parent forum at every school was required that could be published, and a student forum and an educator forum and a community forum of people who are not inside of the school building, right? Because schools don't operate in vacuums. The schools alone strategy is never going to be successful. If you have young people going into a higher quality school, but the community around it is underserved and under-resourced, you have a cycle of an issue that is going to continue. Let me ask by a raise of hands, how many of you think we should tax more to help schools get funded? Okay, so thank you. My sister in the back got right to the second question. She said there's a certain group of people who need to be taxed more. How many of you think, more specifically, the wealthy should be taxed more to pay for schools? Okay, all right. That was one of our questions online. I want to go back to the governor's race, if you will. We know that's coming up. We've already said that we're going to refocus community members on question 1 in the education lockbox. But how do we think that the governor's race is going to impact the quality of schools and what happens not only in the 2019 legislative session, but going forward? Does anybody want to jump in? I see everybody's wheels turning. Yes. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. I think it's going to impact in a sense where if not everybody is brought to the table, just as you mentioned before, perhaps it won't be a large impact. Maybe there'll be some changes here or there. There's definitely going to be promises. I mean, we got promises now about how we need to focus on education, especially from the jealous camp. My thing is, and I probably should have said there's a thing that needs to be taxed more. I would like to see the governor, the challenger, Baltimore County Council. I need Department of Public Works, anybody and everybody that is involved in building, maintaining schools. We all need to come together. I feel that Baltimore City, I'm sorry, recent county to city transplant. Baltimore City Council needs to be held accountable for approving businesses to come into the city and give them all kinds of tax breaks. So you can't just have your residential income tax funding these schools. We have businesses that are given tax breaks 10, 15 years, and then they're out the door. That money does not come back into the city to help infrastructure, to help the schools. That is who I was referring to as who needs to be taxed.
I got you. So I hear you talking about tax incremental financing. Let's get the actual phrases in here.
Yes,
a TIF and pilots where we have corporate citizens, as apparently the Supreme Court seems to think that corporations are people. So since you are a person, you should also contribute your fair share to the community. And we've seen a number of deals happen where there was not a requirement placed on corporations coming to the city to be able to require them to contribute their fair share for the development of the city. And sometimes you hear it under the guise of, oh, well, they will build roads or help the neighborhood look better, bring jobs, but then there's no requirement for them to contribute back into the community. And so, absolutely. I'm going to take this sister up here. Thank you. Will you introduce yourself?
Greetings, everyone. My name is Naomi.
Welcome.
My students call me Miss Hannah.
All right, Miss Hannah.
First, I want to say I'm really happy that you're having this forum, and I'm really grateful to be here. And
Will you put the microphone up so we can hear you?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm really grateful.
Come on, Miss
to be
Hannah,
here.
classroom voice.
And I think that I appreciate the comments that I've heard so far tonight. I just saw a documentary that talked about the infrastructure and talking about capitalism, as this gentleman has mentioned, as being the hungry beast that feasts on us all, black, white, and everything in between and outside, and indigenous, you know. And a lot of us are, I mean, my opinions are very strong. I have very strong opinions, so I have very particular kind of friends. My opinion is that we are really messing around with the branches, and we're touching a little bit on the bark that we could see, but we're not getting to the root. When I grew up in New Jersey, Union Township, the taxes on my mother's house doubled in a year, from $3,000 to $6,000. And all that tax money went to my middle school and my high school because my mother went to the council meetings and voted how her money would go because she had the luxury to, because we were middle class. Not lower middle class or upper middle class, we was middle class. and she was able to pay those taxes as a social worker living in beautiful, gorgeous Union Township, New Jersey. And that was my first example of what it looks like for you to be in control of where your money goes. Coming to Baltimore City, it is not the same. If no one lives in that house that's abandoned right next to you, then where are those taxes on that house going? And if they're gerrymandering, if you've ever heard that term before, a lot of people like to say gentrification and redlining. Have you ever heard of gerrymandering before? If that's going on, then you really can't decide where your money's going to go, right?
Will you talk a little bit about what that is? So do folk know what gerrymander is? Yes. Well, for our people watching, yep.
It's if my teacher, my beautiful, beautiful teacher at BCCC, I hope she's proud of me when I say this, but it's like when you draw a line, I might be wrong, you may have to help me out. When you draw a line around which houses you want to go into a tax district, you draw a line around the house you don't want around there. It's similar to redlining, but not all the way. It is red. Okay. And then you say, oh, these folks, their vote counts for this right here, even though they're in the same community, going in the same, but no. Kind of like the Park Heights situation. There's a nice Park Heights, and then there's a
under-resourced.
There's an under-resourced Park Heights.
Because all of it is nice.
Because I used to live in
all
Park
my
Heights.
people there.
Right.
Yes, okay.
So my Park Heights was my introduction to Baltimore. And I was like, what is going on here? Like, I'm telling you. I'm just like, all right. Why the police all over here, but they don't never go past Pimlico?
Right.
I want to know, what's up? What's going on here, right? And then I learned about the way that Maryland and Annapolis over there and how they structure things for certain people to make sure certain people do better than certain other people. And I'm really avoiding saying it, but you know what I'm talking about.
So I'm going to thank you for your comment, and I'm going to piggyback on that. Something else that people need to be clear about is redistricting. Redistricting is going to be a major issue in the 2019 legislative session. So elections matter, right? Elections matter. And so when you have the tax base paying for schools through property taxes, but you allow for certain communities to be redistricted or redlined out into a more affluent district or community, and then you wonder why there aren't enough resources when they live across the street from under-resourced communities. Those things matter based on who you vote for, because who you vote for are the people we're going to hold accountable in Annapolis to make sure we maintain the power in Baltimore City that our communities deserve, right? The other thing is, too, and I never put on the hot seat. This is a lie. I put her on the hot seat all the time. So I'm talking to you. So, well, yes, okay. You had your glasses off. Baltimore City Public Schools has also not done a redistricting in decades, right? And there is also a disparity in resources inside of the city, right? Where can you get gifted programming? What elementary schools have the types of resources to prepare you for gifted programming? Where are the IB and AP programs? Which schools have access to the arts at the level of Baltimore School for the Arts? Should Baltimore School for the Arts have the type of arts program it has while other schools don't? Like, those questions are contingent upon where people live. And when they say, well, I live in Mount Washington, or I live in Federal Hill, versus I live over east and over west, right? That says something about parent power and family power. So, there are questions both locally and at the state level we should be asking that are very much the same. And too often we hear things like, the schools are not my issue, from sometimes our state legislators and also city council and the mayor's office, right? We're not responsible for schools. We'll put our fair share in, but it's not really our responsibility, which doesn't make sense, because if I voted for you, it is your responsibility, right? So we're actually coming to a close. I want to possibly hear from anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to speak. If there's something compelling you want to share about what you hope from the Kirwan Commission, what you hope for accountability to you, to schools, to our communities. I'd love to hear from you. Delegate Lehrman, yes, thank you.
Hello, thanks for having us today. I think I want to say to some of the students that the election is the first step. You know, I think we all obviously hope that question 1 passes overwhelmingly because it will indicate, as Senator Ferguson said, the appetite of the state for investing in our schools. But passing that and getting that extra funding, voting people into office is the very first step. Because then once they get into office, once we get into office, once a bill is passed, once a law is made, there's so much more to be done. Is the law being implemented correctly? Are the resources coming to the schools that my children attend? Are they being, fairly distributed to where they're needed? And so just keeping your eye on everything that's going on is so important. I think transparency is an important part of making sure that laws work, and they work for everybody. So thanks for what you're doing, but make sure you keep following it and keep holding us accountable.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go to this sister who has been avoiding eye contact with me. Come on, stand up. The entire time, we're going to have the last word. And the question for you is, what didn't you hear? What else do we need to keep talking about to make sure you have what you need?
I'm Margaret Edmonds from Intersections. Okay. I'm Margaret Edmonds from Intersections, and something that I would like to hear more about is students coming together as well, because I feel like we limit ourselves because one group is more privileged than the other group, so we kind of separate ourselves instead of coming together and kind of empowering us, and that's about it.
So thank you. That's a great final word for us. Let's give her a round of applause. You're nervous for no reason. We needed that good word from you. Thank you. Have a seat. Thank you to everyone for watching us. I'm Dr. Kalila Harris for the Real News Network, and this was the Future of Education Part 2. Continue to stay with us. We're going to bring you stories and voices of everyday people like you talking about how we develop a quality public school system, but also education more broadly, how the community joins together to educate our children, and how we make it a priority. Thanks for watching.